Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by Ellen Massell of the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element, with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargeant. Let's get started. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. Marriage and relationships need a lot of patience and love to get through challenges. Communication is key, as they say, in dealing with complications within those relationships. Now, adding the factor of ADHD within that relationship, there can be some reactions to situations which can make your partner feel ignored or sometimes devalued in certain situations. Our guest today is a clinical psychologist licensed in California and an author specializing in ADD and ADHD, Lara Honos-Webb, Ph.D. Thank you so much for joining me, Lara.
Well, I'm so happy to be here, Dina.
Now, this is a big conversation, especially in this day and age when it comes to ADHD and how we sort of navigate those relationships that can come about in situations where we may not be able to sort of explore it as freely as we can. Now, how did you get into talking about ADHD and sort of bringing that awareness into everyday conversations?
Well, I originally got into it because I grew up with a brother that had ADHD. And so I actually knew about it before it was kind of other people knew what it was. I mean, in fact, when he got that diagnosis, no one knew what it was at all. And so I grew up in a family where it was very we were always talking over each other, and there was only one of us diagnosed, but, a lot of quick talkers and, interrupting each other. And, so that there was so much of something that I grew up with that when I became a clinical psychologist, I had never intended to focus on that. But I had presented a paper at a conference on the gifts of ADHD. And there was a acquisition editor sitting in the audience who ended up offering me a book contract, and I wrote my first book, and through that began to specialize in it.
No, that's amazing. It's something that I feel we're now sort of getting in the topic of, and we're now sort of bringing into normal conversations, as well as the amount of diagnoses that are now sort of coming about in people that you don't really notice until they get older. They're like, okay, that doesn't seem as the way that you should be thinking about scenarios, and maybe you should go get tested to see if you have ADHD or any circumstances like that. Like, I know a lot of my friends, they got diagnosed later in their life, so about mid-20s to early 30s. And the change in the way that they sort of realized that, oh, this is not me, this is my ADHD sort of going through. This is not something that's just my personality, but it's sort of separating yourself from that a little bit, where it's a little bit of a relief. And now when they're in relationships, they now have that reason saying, okay, I'm going to zone out a little bit because I can't figure out things directly, or I can't think about things in the same way that you can. So that's just something that you're going to have to understand if we get into arguments, or if we get into conversations that I'm not able to really completely be a part of. Just know that it's not me ignoring what you're saying, but it's me sort of be going through ADHD and going through that circumstance. So it's a really interesting way in terms of conversations that need to be have within relationships and within parental and child relationships as well, where that needs to be that sort of understanding of separation between the person and the diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. That it can be, it can help a relationship to be able to say, this isn't a reflection of how I think about you if I'm interrupting you, but this is a symptom of my ADHD. And, I'm committed to, working on my patience and, growing some skills for communication, but it's not that I'm disrespecting you. And I think that people can understand that. if you can have that communication and, talk about the ADHD, that can help people from feeling that, I don't care about you.
Yes. And I think what people need to realize as well is the fact that we're not using it as an excuse. It's by far not an excuse for like, oh, I'm hiding behind it or anything. But it's almost like that needs to be that layer of understanding from both sides of the party of the fact that this is going to be a part of the relationship, whether you like it or not. This is something that you're going to have to understand. And I've seen a couple of I think one relationship of my friends where they had to break up because the partner was not understanding as to the fact that this is something that he's going to have to realize, he's going to have to understand, he's going to have to deal with every single day. And I think that he was not ready for that type of sort of barrier to be had between the two of them. So it's really interesting as I sort of get older, the fact that this is something we need to create understanding people in these conversations, not just in relationships, but also in workplaces as well, when it comes to people zoning out or people not being able to take the efficient amount of time that they're supposed to be taken to do a task. It will take them a little bit longer to really sit there and just get the work done.
Yeah. And I would add, sometimes it can take a bit longer. And so that there are some things that can be very difficult for people with ADHD that come easy to other people. And, one thing I often think about is I think there's a potential that some technologies can help for people with ADHD, and that things that, if your partner says, can you, do this specific task, and, could be just, keep your bank account balanced, which could be something that would be really difficult for someone with ADHD because it's, focused on, details and having to pay close attention and not making mistakes, not being careless, and, not rushing through trying to get it done as fast as you can. And so I think that some of the hope can come from some technologies in the sense of, I think for a person with ADHD, one of the things you can tell yourself is I'm committed to learning new, software or technologies. Because of course, there's so many softwares that take care of those nitty gritty things. Mm-hmm. But you can be, as a person with ADHD, you can be so impatient, you're not going to learn that software. So it could be that one entree could be for people to have a commitment, like I'm committed to spending 15 minutes a week, learning how to use Excel or whatever that is. And that's not something that is a strength for them, but that commitment. And if you can communicate that commitment, that this is the part that I really struggle with, and this is why. I mean, here's the symptoms of ADHD, and it's difficult for me, but I am committed to making incremental progress over time.
And I think there's that huge development when it comes to 10 years ago, where there's that understanding of, okay, we're going to make a bit more leniency on this. We're going to be a bit more understanding as the fact that you're not able to sit down for 2 hours and get some work done. You can sit down in 2 hours total, but there can be little increments where you get up and do whatever else you need to do. And at least you still get the work done, I think is the main case. Like that work gets done. It may take you a little bit longer to get it done, and deadlines may be a little bit more lenient as well when it comes to the workplace, when it comes to schools as well, when children sort of going through with ADHD and getting their homework done, there may not be that sufficient amount of time to get that done as well. So these conversations I think are so great, especially the conversation we're having today, as to bringing up the different areas that we're thinking of a gap when it comes to ADHD and every neurotypical person out there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would put out there that there's the potentiality for there to be some advantages for people with ADHD in this regard, is as AI is coming into the workplace. And I don't know how AI, artificial intelligence, is going to come into the schools. I can't predict that. But if you think about it, the thing that people with ADHD have the most problems with is memorization and fact finding. And with something like AI, that's going to be in the workplace, we can imagine that that's going to be a really simple thing that is delegated to, ChatGPT. And so what is it that ADHD people have that is such a gift, which ChatGPT will never be able to do? And that is creativity and original thought, thinking of something that's totally out of the box and solving real pressing problems. And that's very different from memorization. And, the kind of, sometimes I call it the regurgitation method in school, where we're going to tell you what it is and you just have to give it back to us. And, but, that out of box thinking is really going to be the thing that will, that I think people can over time pay better attention over time. And it's not going to be that they don't have ADHD, but they can build some of those skills. And in fact, the need to take frequent breaks, a lot of research shows that that's true for many people, that, using your focus time, taking a break restores attention. And so that the advantage of, we don't really know how to teach people how to have out of the box ideas, to be really creative, to feel inspired.
No, that's very true. And I think we focus so much on the regurgitation of situations, regurgitation of information in the workplace, in schools, and even in relationships as well, as to how we think relationships are supposed to go. They're not always going to go that way in situations, but we're sort of, especially as society, we're sort of set with that ingrained thinking of, this is how you're supposed to learn, this is how you're supposed to grow. But there's so many other places, so many other ways to grow, so many other ways to learn, that only neurodivergent people, I think, definitely have that advantage for sure in sort of how their brain works, and everyone knows how their own brain works. So, like for me, I have dyslexia, so me talking and reading from a script is one of the hardest things. But when it comes to that understanding of, okay, I know that I need to breathe, especially on a show like this, where I'm forcing myself to sit down and reiterate what I'm saying and try to think about what I'm supposed to be saying, all while keeping within a time frame, within the conversation. It's difficult, but it's also not. I'm always trying to figure out ways to make it even better, and always trying to build on that, while also giving me that time to be like, I'm not going to be like every neurotypical person who gets to sort of say what's on their mind when I have 1,000 other things sort of playing in my mind at the same time as to what I can say.
And again, that somewhat speaks to an advantage that you can generate solutions and that you can entertain a lot of different ideas. And this idea of, when you talk about how you can't, in relationships and families, that it seems like you can't stay on point. But it is, again, it can make, I think that for other people that don't have the ADHD, that there can be looking for those strengths and finding those strengths, that it can be more interesting to listen to a person with ADHD. It can be, more surprising. It can be, finding what are the benefits of this different way of being and learning to appreciate that. And of course, there are some ways that people can help to manage in let's say, a partnership, in the communication. And so sometimes I will recommend with people that are in partnerships that have ADHD to kind of slow it down. And there's this tool that was developed by Dr. David Burns called EAR: empathy, assertiveness, respect. And so you can work. So an intention could be for someone with ADHD to say, first, I'm going to try and understand what they said. And then then I'm going to tell them what I really think. And then I'm going to show them respect. Like, I may not agree with you. You may be totally wrong, but I respect that you have your reasons for arriving at that conclusion that you just arrived at.
No, that's a really great strategy as well, to sort of balance all three different parts, where you get to say your piece, but you also are mindfully listening to someone else's and mindfully trying to understand where that person is coming from. So no, that's a great sort of strategy to sort of have all that balance within them. Now, before I get sidetracked even further, I love to get to know some of your interests, maybe some recommendations as well. We're playing a little icebreaker. I know we pretty much already started the show,
Yeah.
but I love to sort of get this out of the way and get this spoken about as well. So, to start off with, do you have a favorite book that you could share with us?
I'm a big fan of Pema Chodron, and I particularly like her book, Comfortable with Uncertainty. She's a Buddhist nun, and I think that that is so much the crux of, um, when we have that uncertainty and we're struggling through things, we tense up, we hold our breath, and that makes us, basically a stress response. And that's the worst place to try to solve any kind of a problem. And so comfortable with uncertainty is recognizing that, hey, half the time we don't know what the heck's going on around us, you know? And so recognizing that, can you be in that space of not knowing and still kind of move forward?
Mhm. No, that sounds like a great sort of everyday way of sort of trying to figure out where you're going to be, and also that validation as well, being like, I don't know where what's going to happen. I don't know what I'm going to be doing tomorrow or the day after, but there's that comfort in that thought as well. If you think about it, like, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I may win the lottery, win $1 million tomorrow. You never know. But there's that comfort in the idea that we don't know what's going to happen, which is also a positive thing, I think.
Well, it's interesting because it is, I think, connected to ADHD because um, what is adventure and what impulsiveness is like, I have no idea how this is going to turn out. I'm, I remember hearing about a friend of mine that they went on a cruise and their partner jumped off the ship into the water at a time and place when they were not supposed to do that. And that's an impulsive thing, but they were very comfortable with the uncertainty of how that was going to turn out. So, I mean, adventure and travel and exploration, like if you're like, think about if you're an astronaut going to the moon or somewhere else, that it takes a certain type of person to be willing to make those leaps without having a lot of clarity about how it's going to turn out.
Exactly. I feel like adventure is literally the best part of living. It literally what makes us live. We live for adventure. We don't live to sit and know what's going to happen for day to day. We wait for those days where we don't have to think about what's going to happen today. We wait for those moments where we're like completely free in our plans, where we have like the whole day free to do whatever we want, to a point where we don't know what we want because there's so many things that our brain is wanting us to do, or our adventure spirit is sort of taking us. Like, I remember this one day where I had a whole day free, so I decided, oh, I'm going to go for a hike. So I drove up to a mountain. I had no idea it was raining. It was not an ideal place for a hike, but I still wanted to go on a hike because that's the impulsiveness that I had for that day. And we really live for those impulsive moments, I think.
Mm-hmm. And those will be the things that when you look back on will be so memorable.
Exactly. Now, when it comes to a movie, do you have a movie that you've recently seen, or maybe one of your favorites that you could share?
I have to say, I think it's The Force Awakens, more so because it was an event. Like when that movie came out, I had, my children were younger and we dressed up for the characters. And so this is the sort of the, opposite of being embarrassed as a parent by your kids if they, for example, want to wear their dinosaur pajamas to the grocery store. It's sort of the opposite of that. The kids get to dress up in their favorite characters. I dressed up as BB-8. And so it was a lot of fun. And so that would be probably, my favorite movie just because of all of the memories around it.
Yeah, it's amazing how much you attach, especially when it comes to sci-fi films as well, like how you have that creative freedom, that creativity to pretty much be whatever character you want to be, or whatever figure that you've seen in the film that you want to sort of reiterate in yourself. And the amount of no fear, especially when it comes to cosplay as well. Cosplay actually amazes me as to how well some people are able to sort of reiterate the character and sort of bring that character to life in such a dimension where you don't see an everyday person, or where an everyday person gets to sort of be whoever they wanna be. They get to be the most brave character, but they probably have a lot of fear within their own selves that they want to sort of counter with that character they sort of see themselves in. So, no, I think cosplay and sort of dressing up as characters is probably one of the greatest ways to have that self-expression that you sort of don't get in everyday life.
Hmm. And someone pointed out to me afterwards that BB-8, it can move in every direction. And there's some,
Mhm.
analogy to ADHD there as well. Like, I'm not focused. I can go here. I can go there. I can go backwards. I can go to the side.
Yeah, there's the whole freedom to it. I love that. I love cosplay is one of my favorite things to sort of get into. I'm not a cosplayer, but I love going to the conventions when they do have them coming up, because I love sort of seeing how incredible how long it takes for some people to sort of recreate the characters that they love so much, the outfits and the whole embodiment of the character they sort of love to build.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to be able to kind of switch out of. And in fact, it's probably when we think about how can people regulate their emotions, probably the underlying core of it is flexible thinking. And what is cosplay but flexible thinking, trying to see it from a completely different perspective?
Exactly. Now, I hope you're all well warmed up for the questions that we're asking today. And I know I've pretty much asked some of them already. But to start off with, I know that everyone has a very different idea as to what family is and what sort of creates a family and what makes a family, either professionally or personally. Do you have a definition of family that you could share with us?
I would say that family is that it's the people who care the most about you. We tend to think of it, of course, as biological, but it can also be the people who get you, the people who understand you. Some families are very close knit. Some families are kind of falling apart. Some families do break up in different ways, but it's the people who ultimately are always there for you and who want the best for you. And usually, of course, it's biological, but it can become, families that are created about the people who are there for you.
Mhm. No, that's a great definition. I think we sort of lose track in that separation as well, where there's that responsibility of having the biological family, but also the fact that you need people that understand you. And sometimes biological family aren't the people that understand you, especially if we were talking earlier about the cosplay world. There's that cosplay family where they all really get that character that you want to be, that when you go back home, some family members don't understand why you want to go dress up as your favorite Star Wars character or Star Trek character. But the people in that community understand that personality, understand that side of you that I don't think a lot of people would. And I think everyone needs that validation in a sense. And if you're not getting that validation in something, then you have to find a way to get that validation in your personality in some other way.
Hmm. Hmm. And, hopefully, we have our families of origin, and then we have the families that we create, as by who you choose to marry and how you choose to bring, you may choose to bring children in the world, you may adopt them, you may have them biologically. And all of those give you a chance to, what didn't you felt wasn't working out in the family that you were born into, you can, hopefully make it better um, and to kind of evolve your genes, I guess I should say, your family lineage.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Now, how does ADHD affect communication between partners in a relationship?
Well, if we just go through some of the symptoms, difficulty paying attention,
Mhm.
impulsive speech, hyperactivity, can't sit still, that can be a really hard conversation to have. I mean, it can make it hard for that communication and for the family. And so when you think about the relationships, for someone who's in a relationship with someone that has ADHD, and if that person doesn't have ADHD, I think this is true of all relationships, but more true for ADHD, is you actually can't control other people. As much as we think that that's true, what you need to focus on is and this is true for the ADHD person and a not ADHD person, you can control your thoughts and you can control your emotions. Those are the things you can control. And we can influence other people and we can persuade other people, but we can't control them. We don't have a little remote control where they're going to either agree with us or do what we want them to do. And I think that takes some, again, like flexible thinking in the sense that being willing to work towards those compromises, and also just having some acceptance that that this is, again, not personal. They're not insulting you. This is how their brain works. And try to find some, education and understanding of not only how that works, but there's some benefits to that as well. They, more interesting people generating lots of other, new ideas, and may have a difficult time staying on point.
Yeah. And I think we were talking about that a little bit earlier when it comes to the relationship, and when it comes to sometimes some partners aren't ready for that sort of responsibility that they'll find themselves in, sort of in a sense of making sure that everyday living is okay for that partner with ADHD who's not able to really sit still or stay focused on certain tasks, or making sure that they're eating, making sure that everyday sort of circumstances is important. And there are some partners who aren't ready to have that responsibility taken on themselves. I I think I mentioned a little bit earlier when it comes to my friend who did break up, there is that sense of they had that conversation towards the end of their relationship, not at the beginning of the relationship, of to what to expect between them and what kind of responsibility that what kind of requirements that she'll need of someone who is in a relationship with her. And because they had that conversation later on in that relationship, it became something too much for him to really understand, okay, she is requiring too much and I'm unable to give that to her when I'm still trying to build my own self up. It's a hard conversation to have, but I think I can understand his side of that, because not everyone is willing to sort of take on that responsibility of making sure that the everyday situations are okay, everyday circumstances, even making sure that she's going to bed on time, or that they're going to sleep on time, and they're able to sort of wind down, because they're not able to wind down in the same way or in the same timing or the same time frame. It made it a little bit more difficult for her to really feel like she had to be herself in that relationship. And I think that conversation happened too late, in my opinion, I think, as to what is needed to be expected and what the relationship should look like.
Mm-hmm. I like what you're saying, that it makes sense to have those conversations up front and give them the opportunity to figure out, maybe you have to, see it and see if that's something that, I guess what I'm saying is disclosing ADHD and, helping them understand what it means and what it looks like. And I think, and I'm always such a big fan of also disclosing the gifts that can come, not particular to you, that may be, related to ADHD. And I think, for relationships, it can be really helpful to distinguish, and this is hard to do maybe early on in relationships. So we all have a superficial side. That's if you were to meet me or meet you at a party, they, would have the superficial aspects of that. And then there's what we would call the daily dose, which is if you had to live with this person, what is it like day to day? And you can imagine that could look really different. If you meet someone at a party versus what the day to day is with them. But then this is where I think that for ADHD people, you can really focus if you're trying to, explain to people who you are, is what I call the core essence. And a person could be, flighty, having difficulty focusing. But, what is their core essence in terms of this is a person you can trust? Is this a person who will hang through hard times and solve problems? And what matters to you? I mean, every person, the core essence is going to mean something different. And what are they looking for? But the things about a person that is fundamentally who they are and won't change. And I don't think that that's usually ADHD, meaning that other people, like who they are, has to do more with their values and their interests and a lot of other things. That's not the core essence isn't defined by ADHD. That's kind of like the day-to-day managing of life is what ADHD affects the most. And so I think it can be helpful for people in relationships to sort that out. We can come up with a dozen different iterations of that, like a person who's fantastic superficially, but annoying every single day, but have a heart of gold as the core essence. So noticing what matters the most to you and trying to get clarity about those three different levels.
Mm-hmm. Now, ADHD in parents, I think, is a huge conversation that we don't really see that often because we're sort of focused on when it comes to ADHD, we think of younger kids having them or single individuals having ADHD, but not really how it would go as a parent. What are some of the common challenges that parents with ADHD could sort of find themselves in when raising children?
Well, so imagine if you have ADHD and you had a hard time even managing yourself. And so now you have a family. And there's some good things and some bad things. The good thing about having a family, if you have a partner, there's of course people that choose to have kids on their own. There's people that get divorced, so it's not always two people in a family. But you can, if you can communicate with your partner, that the other person can recognize almost like accommodations, like, okay, you're not going to be good at that. Instead of complaining about it every day, we're just going to have a division of labor. I'm going to do these things and you're going to do those things. And I want you to, have a growth mindset and get a little bit better at doing the dishes if that's not the thing. Or I want you to get a little bit better at these things. And I want both of us to have a growth mindset. But I get fundamentally my strengths are different from your strengths and my weaknesses are different from your weaknesses. And just having those conversations. Now, the worst side of that can be when there's not that willingness to sort of, have like different tasks, but all both trying to get better at both. When one person just thinks it's a fundamental, a fatal flaw that you can't do X, Y, Z, whatever that is. And that could be, you can't, cook, or this person can't manage, like the cars or whatever the day-to-day things are. This person, is tech support and this person doesn't understand tech at all. That those kinds of things can then become, things where you support each other. You don't complain about it as much.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very true. I think especially when it comes to the idea of the organizational skills, like organization is a really difficult thing for everyday person with ADHD. But you add the fact that you have children that you also need to keep track of their activities, of their whereabouts, when to drop them off at school, the timing of everything. It adds that so much more stress, I would imagine, as to figuring out, okay, I am not organized, but I need to make sure the kids are organized. I need to make sure that their situations are fine so it doesn't affect how I raise them or how I am sort of expected to handle them, especially if your partner is the one working and you're the one who stays at home, takes care of the kids, and that's your job every single day. And even managing that, I think, it seems like such a huge chore. Even someone who's neurotypical, that seems like such a difficult situation to do as a parent. But add the fact that you're also poorly organized or your organization skills aren't that great. There's that responsibility that also seems too much that can reduce the amount of care that you take for yourself as well. So I did want to know, what are some ways for that parent specifically to sort of manage the self-care and also maybe tell their partner that I need to take a step back from this, that it's getting a bit too much?
Mm-hmm. I do think that it does have to do with communication, but it also has to do with what we're kind of talking about, helping the other partner to distinguish what is the core essence and what can the daily dose end up looking like. Because, so for example, there are some solutions for those things. Like if if the person's terrible at cooking, there's many ways to feed your family, and they may not, maybe, simple recipes or taking takeout meals. And so there can be, so being able to see some of those things as accommodations, what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. And I think also is, there are some, like, for one thing with parents, it's very hard to keep on track of their kids' homework, for example. And in some communities, there can be choices. So, for example, research shows that in elementary school, the homework that they give kids doesn't actually improve, that those are things they can do in the classroom. And so I hate to admit this, but I'm kind of actually advocating for an educational revolution. But you can find this in some places. There are schools, for example, there's Montessori schools. There's schools that honor more the developmental capacity, let's say elementary school kids, and they're just reasonable about it. Now, as a parent, you do have a choice. On one extreme, you might find a school where they don't have homework because they understand the developmental level of the kids. And then the super high-powered, even much more expensive schools where they're giving your kids, they're studying for the SAT in second grade. And that's a little bit of a joke, but a little bit. But the idea, so the idea there is, as a parent, you also have choices, and you can make life harder for yourself, and you can make life easier for yourself. You can prioritize, I want my kid, to put the pedal to the metal. And I would just recommend for parents to look at the costs and benefits of both of those choices. So for example, just a certain level of stress on kids at a young age is not healthy for them. And so we're thinking about, okay, maybe I'll make a different decision for the second part of their education, middle school or high school. But, that in elementary school, for example, you may choose to have a less academically rigorous course of study, for example.
I'm all against the homework thing as well for kids, because I see how much time they're spending in school. There's 8 hours a day they're already spending in school, and plus the 3 hours of homework that they get given is so. I mean, they're not able to get decent amount of sleep. They're not even allowed to have extracurricular activities that they enjoy doing outside of school because of the amount of homework that the kids get. And it doesn't balance out. And it's even more difficult for parents to sort of keep track of, like you said, of making sure that the kids' science project gets done. I mean, I remember I had to build a volcano. I didn't tell my mom until the day before it was due, that I needed to get it done. So as mad as everyone was, there's that responsibility of, okay, I'm a parent. I have to make sure my kids' homework gets done. So we went over to the hardware store and got all the stuff that we needed to make a volcano at 9:00 at night. So, so there's that aspect of we're having to balance being a parent. But if our child is also going to there's also science, I think, of like, if the parent has ADHD, and there's sort of a higher chance that the child also gets ADHD.
Yes.
So that organization also passes down to children.
Exactly.
And that sort of just completely changes how we're supposed to parent, because we're not also parenting our own ADHD, but our child's ADHD, and making sure that they know how to keep organized and how they know what works for them. And it does have advantages. It definitely does. I think, especially in terms of the creativity, especially in terms of making sure that everything, but everyday tasks also still is such a society-based aspect where we're having to make sure everyday things are sort of done, everyday work, everyday homework, projects, all of that still needs to get done. And it can so get stressful. So the added amount of homework that you get sent to a child leaves that lack of creativity that the child's also able to sort of lean on as well, and sort of get their outlets out of the way in order for them to really enjoy the best of structure and creativity and impulsivity that sort of comes in with any child or parent with ADHD.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think another thing to add to the school aspect of it is that one of the best ways to increase attention is physical exercise. And it's also, I mean, the science behind that physical movement and exercise helps people to focus. And also the idea that, people can pay more attention to what's interesting to them. And also what we know is, again, the science about the importance of taking breaks in terms of restoring attention and motivation is there. And so it, I think that some of the educational ideas really actually don't map on to what are the best learning practices. In fact, as more and more research comes out, maybe they didn't know that, 10 years ago, but we kind of take it for granted. If you read the books about the people write about with how to be the most productive. There's 5 million productivity books out there, and they're kind of coming down to the same thing. You got to take breaks. You got to find something you're interested in. And so when you look at that, why are our schools, it reminds me of this joke I heard that, so I think it was like Rip Van Winkle. He was the guy who fell asleep for 100 years, and then he woke up, and the only thing he still recognized was the schools. And I feel like that's the world we're living in.
It really is. It's so attuned to what we're supposed to be doing, the world that we're supposed to be living in, and the structure that society and the socializing has really set us up to be, which is, we got to go down the production line. Each generation keeps going down the same production line, and we're not able to really go outside of the box. And I think that's where neurodivergence really comes in handy, as to making us think, okay, there's other ways of thinking, there's other ways of going, but their skills aren't being utilized and being diminished for since high school. And I think the fear of like thinking outside the box really comes in when in high school time, when you're like, oh, okay, I'm not really following what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm getting in trouble because I'm not really able to sit still. I have to change myself in order to do that. And when it comes in as parents as well, in relationships and parents and growing into who we're supposed to be, who we're wanting to be, we're having to change a lot of ourselves, or ADHD neurodivergence are having to change a lot of their selves as to what is sort of expected and what we're capable of as well, and sort of separating the two.
Right. And you know what? Like, one of the most fascinating thing is that a lot of times, when kids are in school and they're really struggling, and it's like, what are they getting in trouble for? Talking too much and not sitting still. And so a lot of the times I'll say, well, what do your parents do for a living? And they might be, well, they're salespeople. And what do? Well, they travel and they move around all the time and they talk all the time. I mean, so there's a lot of professions where talking all the time and moving around all the time is part of it, whether it's because you're traveling, or even, let's say, even if you're a teacher, you're standing in front of students all day and trying to hopefully energize them in some ways. So the thing is that people get in so much trouble for talking and moving in school doesn't map onto the real world. And we have not addressed that gap at all.
No, I completely agree. And it's definitely something that it's not going to change. I'm so scared as well that it's not going to change for a few generations in schools. It's not going to be something that I mean, my sister, she had a whole fear of going outside, and of throughout all her life. I think since third grade, she was homeschooled because she had that whole fear of leaving the house and all of the anxiety that came in. She flourished throughout homeschool because she was able to be in a place where she felt safe, but could still explore other places if she wanted to. And even though people were worried about, oh, she's not going to socialize, she's not going to make friends, she was able to build that confidence within herself first before finding people. And she knew what kind of friends she wanted. It wasn't until she got to, I think, a couple of years ago, where she found a huge group of friends that really accept her for who she is and really have that understanding of, okay, if she can't leave the house today, she'll go out the next time she's able to join us. Like, there's no forcing in that. But society is not prepped up for her anxiety. It's not prepped up for her way of thinking. And that's the scary thing, that I was so scared watching her grow up, because she was always diminished for thinking differently, always diminished for not really having that say as to how her life was gone, and pretty much forced to go outside, forced to go to places. Everyone's also telling her she needs to get out more. And that sort of took away a lot of her freedom to be able to do what she wanted.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so just another example of neurodiversity, then whether it's anxiety or ADHD, that, you know, I mean, that I think the guidance is to find like, what is their core essence? And that on a day-to-day basis, they prefer this, they don't prefer this. And we also know that over time, people can change and develop as they mature and age, particularly as kids. And so I think it's very much about asking what's working and what needs need to be, how can we meet these needs versus saying there's something really wrong with you.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Now, this leads us really well into the next part of the show, which is the practice and habits. Now, what is a practice that you recommend for couples navigating the challenges of ADHD, either as parents or as partners?
I think that it has to do with what I would call the 5-to-1 ratio. So this comes from John Gottman's work, and it's the idea that in a marriage or even with children, you want to have 5 positive interactions to every negative. And you may think this sounds a little bit too, like mathematical, but there's a whole book about this, and there's a lot of scientific research that's the ratio that people need to have that makes a marriage work. And it also applies for children. Some people have even said for children, it might be a 7-to-1 ratio because they need more. And so the idea is, when you were talking about earlier, the relationships that failed, and that they kind of say that the failure had to do with the fact that this person couldn't do this and this person wanted them to do that. But if you think in the face of those kinds of discrepancies, if you could just, find the positives in something else besides that one area, that it's potentially that relationship could work if the person was capable of looking for the positives and sharing those positives and communicating those positives, because we all have a lot of strengths and a lot of weaknesses, right? But our relationships, whether it's parenting or partnerships, we have 100% choice about what we focus on. Are we focusing on what they're doing right, or are we focusing on what they're doing wrong? So there we go. It's really something you do have control over.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great advice, the 5 positive to 1 negative, because I think we sort of lose track and focus so much on the negative that it overpowers all the other positive things that sort of come about. Not just in relationships. I feel like that's such a big thing in every situation where we're so focused on the negative. We're always sort of expecting the negative to be the reason why we want out of a friendship, we want out of the relationship, we want out of the workplace. We're not really thinking about the positives that can sort of come out about that. And it sort of does leave that gap for, the what if I stayed? What if I did give it a chance? What if I did sort of do this differently? And I feel like that the John Gottman's sort of view on that does sort of take away the what ifs if we did sort of think about that a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's something that can be a intentional practice as well. And I can imagine, sometimes I'll recommend that people have fun with it. And it could be like, okay, I'm really mad at you about this. And then they'll be like, here's the 5 positives, but now let me go back to that. But at least you're having fun with it. And at least you are noticing that there are positives, assuming that you're being, authentic with what those positives are, and really trying to find the balance of more positives and negatives. There's no such thing as a negativity-free relationship or people without other weaknesses and faults. It's really what we choose to focus on.
Yeah, and I think it does really help if the 5 positives were not sort of the generic responses as well. It's like a very genuine to that person response. I think that would definitely change it, because you can have like, oh, I love how you make me laugh. I love how you do this. But that's so generic in a sense where it's not like very specific to that person. So maybe in that circumstances, it would be 5 non-generic positives that can sort of come
Right.
about.
Another way to think about that is what I was saying earlier about like the superficial side, what they're like on a day-to-day basis and what their core essence is. If you can find those core essence positives, it's going to hit a little bit deeper. It's going to sink in, and it's going to be like, oh, wow, this is someone who sees me. I mean, if on the other hand, if someone's positives were all like really superficial things that, didn't really define who you were, it might be as less impactful. But so I think that that's the lesson in there. Try to find those positives, and it's more meaningful when it's about who their core essence is, rather than, that they wore a nice coat the other day or
Yeah.
but
Yeah, the
those are good too.
superficial
Those are good too.
Mhm. No, they are good. I think the superficial does sort of
Yeah.
have its positives in
Yeah.
itself, but the core values of a person, I think, are the most genuine responses that you could possibly find about them. And I think
Exactly.
that's the reason you stay, or that's the reason that you try to make it work in a relationship. Even sort of take away the fact that they have ADHD, you sort of like, what's their core value of that person?
Right.
And why are you staying with them? What did you find attractive about them to begin with? What did you like about them to start off with? And yeah, so it's a really interesting aspect to really think of. So that's definitely something that I'm going to try to play with my partner and see if we can figure out the 5 positives in every argument that we have now.
Well, I hope you report back, but
Yes.
but again, I want to say there is a lot of research on it. It tends to be helpful. It tends to keep people together.
Mhm. No, I can definitely see it working. I think it's gonna be a very interesting game to sort of play as well with your partner. Now, this leads us really well into the open mic section of the show, and this gives you a chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about that we didn't really get to discuss throughout the show. And I know that we spoke about this a little bit before as to what our conversation was going to be today, and I'd love for the audience to hear more about it. So, in the last minute or so, I'd love to give you the floor and share the conversation that we have.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I think for parenting and also for relationships is to start with not only finding the gifts, but also, setting goals with each other and, talking. It doesn't have to be there's even agreement all the time, but, what are your goals? What are your aspirations? Because you can create your future. And it's this idea of the growth mindset that there's always problems in relationships, but two people can also change. And, setting those goals to make some small changes, which could be as simple as, instead of leaving the dishes there, I'm going to 2 times a week start to do the dishes. Or I'm going to, help out with childcare more, whatever that ends up being. And then as you set those goals, saying, okay, because it can be overwhelming to be like, oh, I said I was going to do this thing, is what is the next smallest step that I can do? And finding out, and as you take, because it's overwhelming to go from here's my goal to getting the goal. There's small steps in between. What is your next step? That's all you have to figure out right now. And then through that, with ADHD, there can be that lack of motivation, but there's ways to boost motivation. And it could be as simple as, what would be the benefits of doing this? If you have a child that doesn't want to do, their book report or study for their spelling test. Well, what do you think would be the benefits of studying for this? And what are the costs of not studying for it? And it's kind of like you're asking questions rather than, wagging your finger. And I told you to do this, and why aren't you doing it? So you're giving them these questions, these leading questions. Like, I noticed you didn't get started. Why didn't you get started? Oh, okay. And you hear what they have to say. And a lot of times really deep things can come out of those. Why didn't you get started with your homework? And I'd be like, well, this thing happened at school today and I'm really upset by it. And I keep thinking about it and I'm having a hard time getting started. Can be the way you begin to have those real conversations if you listen and you ask questions. So that's true of parenting and also partnerships. So those are some ways to begin to, and then as I've mentioned, emotional regulation is going to be key. And with ADHD, it's not a symptom of ADHD in the DSM, but there's obviously the problem of emotional regulation. And some of those tools, that people can use can be as simple as going through a checklist of what makes me mad, what makes me sad, what makes me anxious, and then switching it over to what makes me happy, what am I grateful for, what am I proud of? And so it's kind of like you can feel it to heal it to the negative emotions, but change the channel to, proud, happy, excited. And so these are some things we have control over, and they can be habits that we can create for ourselves where we can manage our own mood, which makes us less dependent on other people making us feel in a good mood or a bad mood.
Mhm. No, that's a very great way of looking at it. And I think it sort of allows us that flexibility as well to sort of feel through the emotions. Like, I think we sort of forget if things don't go our way, a lot of people are automatically having to switch as to what's working. But there are some people that also need to take time in order to be like, okay, this didn't go right. I need to take a day to really understand the fact that it didn't go the way that I thought it was going to go, and then I can get back to thinking about what I can do now. Like, for example, if you don't get a job that you applied for, sometimes there can be a little bit of grief in the fact that you didn't
Yeah.
get the job. But then you're also just like, I can't just go quickly and like some people are like, "Oh, go to apply to other jobs. And see how that goes." But there's also that, okay, but I also have that fear of the rejection of the fact of not getting the other job that I still need to recover from first before I go ahead and apply to another job and just see the fact that that's the situation that's happening. There is that time that I think everyone needs to become not just neurodivergents, but also neurotypical people who also needed to take that time and that understanding of, okay, things didn't go the way that I was expecting it to go. I need to figure out what I can do now or what I can do after.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's why something like the blues is a whole genre of music. Like there is a reason to kind of, you know, to feel like the blues for some of the time and to be in that space, to honor it, but also then to be able to, get back on the horse, as they say, and find some of the things that you can be grateful for or excited about or proud of in yourself. Like they're both true. And that's the thing about emotions is that, it can be like a painting with pastels blending with dark and stormy blues. And that's, I think, helpful to give yourself the permission to have those and also to be able to change the channel.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a way of us to, I mean, grief is a big thing. Grief is enables us to move on, but we can't do that if we don't grieve for it first. So there's that whole understanding of emotion, a grief being a great emotion because it allows us to feel something that we don't allow ourselves to feel every single day. But it gives us that space, like, I need to grieve or I need to reminisce on something that used to be in my life and now isn't, or used to be okay, but now isn't. So yeah, that definitely is a great way of allowing us to sort of feel our emotions through. Now, thank you so much, Lara, for coming onto the show today and for talking about this. I love discussing these topics because I feel like it's not something that I don't have a lot of availability to talk about this in everyday situations. So to come on the show and talk about ADHD and relationships and communication is such a big thing for me. So thank you so much for being part of the conversation with me.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Now, if our audience would like to find out a little more about you or maybe find some of the books that you've written as well, is there a place that they're able to go to?
Well, I have a website at www.adddisagift.com. And so that's a place that they can find me. And I've written books about the gifts of ADHD. I've written books about brain hacks, which is broader than ADHD. Really, anyone could read it. And it's about actually how do you build your attention? How do you build your motivation? How do you regulate your emotions? And they're hacks. So they're like meant to be quick tools and tips that can help you to manage those. So that's brain hacks. And I have 7 books, so I guess I don't need to go into them all. One of them is called Listening to Depression. And, I talk in that book about some of the not cures, my goodness, no. Some of the, ways you can support yourself through depression is to give yourself permission to do the things that are healthy pleasures to give yourself permission to have pleasure in your life. Sometimes we can get really hard on ourselves, and give yourself permission to just be present with the moment, not having to figure out what you're afraid of in the future or what happened in the past, and giving yourself permission to take power. And so that's in my book, Listening to Depression.
Oh, that's perfect. I definitely have a link down to your website below, as well as to your Psychology Today as well. So thanks again, Lara, for coming onto the show and for talking about this. And I hope the audience and I have learned so much about ADHD and communication and how to sort of balance that in relationships. Now, I hope you guys did learn as much as I did. I'll see you all in the next episode. You've been listening to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by the Family Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at fa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargeant. Thanks for tuning in.